Okay, it's 9:30, so we are going to go ahead and get started this morning. Good morning all, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on creating reports in MIP. I am Anita Holmgren. I am the CFO here at ICA, and co-presenting with me today is Lynn Petrelli from the Illinois Valley Economic Development Corporation. Lynn, you want to say good morning?
Good morning, everyone.
So to get started today, we just wanted to go over a little bit of the agenda of the things that we are going to be covering. We wanted to give you an overview of the types of reports that are frequently requested by DCEO. They could also be reports, the same type of reports that you may be getting requests from auditors or other monitors as well. But they are reports that are used either in grant monitoring, grant reporting, or closeouts. The intention is to provide some consistency in the reports that are requested and to learn some of the tips and tricks from us in order to make your reporting easier, and also to provide the requester with the information that is needed in the format that makes it easiest for them to see what it is that you're trying to tell in your story of what you're doing with your grants. Some of the most frequently requested reports are the excess cash report, a detailed general ledger report, a check register, a trial balance, and the closeout trial balance. And we're also going to review a specific drawdown trial balance that aligns with the DCEO drawdown spreadsheet report that you complete when you're requesting drawdown funds. Lynn and I will be going through the creation of each of these reports with you. If you have questions, please enter them into the chat and we will call upon you. And just as a little housekeeping, please be sure that you stay muted when you're not conversing with the presenters. You know, it's very distracting to get background noise, and others, we've all been in trainings and webinars or meetings where, you know, you pick up significant background noise. So if you could please make sure that you stay muted, that would be very helpful. Another little bit of housekeeping is just to let you know that Lynn and I are both fiscal people. We are not presenters by trade, not something that we do on a regular basis. And so please have some patience with us in any of our little glitches that we may have along the way. We'll do the best we can, but you know, our intention is to try to give you information to make your lives a little easier, and but just have a little grace and appreciation of our unfamiliarity with doing webinars and whatnot. It's, like I said, it's not what we typically do with our days. We appreciate hearing your questions, and we also appreciate hearing any tips or tricks that you may want to share with your fellow fiscal staff on anything that could be your reporting struggles, or maybe they're your reporting successes and things that you have learned how to do that you think may be helpful to others. It would be a great opportunity to share that within this setting. So this webinar is not going to be covering the preparation of standard financial reports or financial statements, such as the statement of activities, the statement of financial position, or the statement of cash flows. However, some of what you learned here today may also help you in the preparation of those reports as well. And if that is something that you do need assistance with in preparing, please let me know, and maybe that's something that we'll be able to consider for a future webinar. But we do appreciate your attendance today, so we're going to get started with the excess cash report. As you are aware, when you draw down federal funds, you must quickly turn around those funds and spend them on your expenses. We are not to be holding on to excess cash. One area that OCA monitors must test is whether or not an agency is efficiently requesting their cash funds and then quickly converting those dollars into payment of expenses. If you routinely request funds on a reimbursement basis, this should not really be a problem for you. However, if you request cash draws prior to making payments or payroll, then you have to carefully monitor the timing of your drawdown requests with the date that you are actually going to be expending those funds, so that you have a very small impact on your excess cash that you may have on hand. So the report that we're going to cover will help to show monitors where what days you may have had excess cash, what amount of excess cash you may have had on those days, so that they can determine if you're drawing funds too early or not getting funds expended quickly enough. So to begin with, you're going to go to the report tab, and from there you'll go to the general ledger analysis, and from there the expanded general ledger. Once you're in the expanded general ledger, you are going to pull down either a report you already have created, or you're going to create a new one or copy and rename it so that you have a report that you can readily go to obtain this information. This particular report is called the Excess Cash Report OEA Monitor. Naming your reports in a way that helps you easily identify what kind of information you're going to get out of that report is helpful. It also saves you some time, and it keeps you from having to go back and recreate reports because you didn't name them in a way that helps you identify what is there. It also is helpful to click the header and to make sure that you put the name of your report in the header. And this helps you when you look back at what did I prepare previously and how did I get that report. If you have the name of the report in the header, you can see when you have that saved and what you shared with the monitor before. It helps you identify what report you used. And if you save them, I save reports for everything. I have tons of reports. But if you continue to save like that, then typically all you have to do is update the dates and possibly a grant code or a fund code, or make sure your numbers are correct. And you can just rerun the same report without having to go through a lot of setup. Because we are going to be looking at a cash account for this report, you want to make sure that your account balances begins date is the date of your last closed fiscal year. So in this case, I'm just pulling from an old report here. This was one that was dated back in 2015, but at that time, that was the last closed fiscal year. And then for your current reporting year begins date, you will want to make that your calendar year. This would not be your fiscal year, that would be your calendar year. So you want to have that the beginning date of your next calendar start date. So these dates may or may not be the same date. If you hadn't closed your books in a couple of years, you may be back a couple of years on this one compared to what it would be on your current reporting year. And then in your current transaction dates, what you want to do, typically your monitors are going to ask for a test month, but it may be several, they may request more than 1 month. So you would want to put the beginning date of the month that they're requesting and the ending date of that same time period. On the content tab, which would be the second tab of your reporting screens, there's two table sections. The top table section is going to set up the page of your report, and everything on both sections, everything would be listed here along the left, and you're going to move it to the right according to the right side of the table, according to what report you want to run. or where what the information that you want in that report and the order that you want it in. In this case, we want it to total and to break a page by fund code. Even though in this example, we're only using one fund code, you may have a couple of fund codes that you need to pull into a report. And so you want each of the fund codes. Now, don't get confused by my terminology of it being called a fund code. In my MIP setup books, that's what I have that field named. You may have that segment of the general ledger named something different, such as a grant code, or I don't know what else you may have it called, but a lot of people do have that called just grant or grant code or a segment or something like that. But in my books, it is set up to be called fund code. So although some of the segments of the general ledger may be named differently than yours, the important thing is that you know where in your general ledger that information and that data is stored. So for me, it's fund code, and I want it to break on that. And to total by that also. So you want to make sure I have the show total checked. On the lower section, this section allows you to set up the information according to how you want it to print out in the body of the report. So this would identify your columns of the report. And in this case, we want to use the effective date as the first, because we're looking at excess cash and what cash we may have on a particular date. So we want to have that set up to sort and to total by the effective date. And please be sure that you use effective date. This is different than using transaction date or using your session date. These dates could be different. The effective date, as you may recall, is the date that you use when you're entering the transaction detail of the report. And this date, when it comes to a cash item, should be the date that your cash account was actually affected by that transaction. So it may be, in some cases, it may be different than your expense date. It could be that you're prepaying an expense, but it's effective on another date, or it could be a deferred expense or something similar to that. So the effective date in this case would be the date that it, as you're recording it, should be the date that your cash was actually affected by the transaction. So again, we're going to sort by that. We're going to have it in ascending order. So in the sort column, you want to do the drop down and select ascending, and then you want to click the show total. Also, have it select any place that you can to show repeats and to wrap the information. We are going to be exporting this out into an Excel spreadsheet. So the size and width of your columns really is not going to be material to this report, because we're going to end up putting it in Excel anyway. It's not going to be printed out. And then in your custom heading column, I don't know if you use this very often. I tend to just let it go ahead and pull with whatever the criteria is that I move over, but some people like to change the heading to be something different than what the defined label is. And with the exception of GL code and GL title, you can name these whatever you choose to name them. If you wanted to call a debit cash in and a credit cash out, you could change the name of it here to indicate that. But typically, you're going to leave them the same. You may change ID to say name or vendor ID or something like that. But you really don't need to change that unless you have a strong desire to make a change in the custom setting. So in addition to the effective date, the other segments of the general ledger that we are going to need for this report are the GL code, the GL title, the session ID, the ID or name, the document number, the transaction description, and the debit and credit amounts. You could add the transaction source if you choose, but it's really not as important to this particular report as it might be to some others. And then we're going to move on to the filter tab. you're going to select your GL cash code. So from your left-hand column, you're going to select the GL code and you're going to make it equal your cash code that you have in the GL. Now, if you have more than one cash code that you may be using for that particular grant, you're going to, instead of having equal, you're going to have in, and you're going to separate your GL numbers with a comma. So maybe my cash code for this grant was 1003, but perhaps I also had activity in 1005. So I'd have 1003, comma 1005. And then in the, you're also going to move over fund code or grant code, whatever you may call it. You're going to move that over here. If you have just one, you can leave it equal. If you have more than one, it's the same thing. You put in, and then you're going to list them separated by commas. In this case, I have one fund code that I'm looking at. But as you know, we indicated earlier, there may be times that you have more than one grant code that needs to be evaluated. And if you recall on our first screen, we're going to separate those grant codes by page. And then we're going to go over to, we're going to skip the groups because we do not need groups for this report. We're going to skip that and go to the options tab. And in the options tab, we want to select year-end adjustments. We also want to select unposted transactions, just in case there is something out there that had not yet been posted. And we also want to select the suppress lines with all zeros. We don't need lines that just have in and out transactions that have no net effect on the cash. So we don't need those. We don't need any of the other ones selected because we're already defining it to be totaling by day and on the one particular cash code. Then we're going to print the report to the screen. And this is what it's going to look like. You're going to have your opening balance, and then each day is going to list the transactions that took place and give you a daily balance. Now note that the daily balance is not a running total. It is only the total for that day. And this is the reason we have to export it out into an Excel spreadsheet. So you're going to select to here to send it out to an Excel spreadsheet. Once you have it in a spreadsheet, you can add another column to the far right to get a running total each day of the cash. And you would do that just by taking what is your beginning balance, and then when you get to the next day's total, you would either add the debit or the credit, depending. So you would take the beginning balance, add a debit, subtract the credit, and that would give you that day's net cash balance. And you would do the same thing for each one. You would take the balance above, add the debit, subtract the credit, and continue moving on with there. From my balances, you can tell that we operate on a reimbursement basis because we have negative cash all the time until we get the payment for the expenses. And as we did here, and then we continue with the negative balance until we get the next one caught up. But yours may have, days that are positive and days that are negative. But this report is going to, at a glance, the monitor can tell how many days in a row did you have cash available? Was it negative cash? Was it, in this case, we were owed funds every day. But it's easy to tell from dropping it into a spreadsheet. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Lynn, and she is going to talk to you about the expanded general ledger report.
All right, the expanded general ledger report, that's something that's requested by DCEO. It's their I-4 report. So the detailed general ledger report for all of the OCA funds, the report must include the GRS budget codes. And that's what we use them under one of our segments. We use the GRS codes as one of our segments so that we can identify them. You might call them something different. Then you'll have your general ledger accounts and your account descriptions, transaction descriptions, your dates and your amounts. And then however you prefer to sort it. So if we go through this screen here, sorry, that's a little. All right, so on the first screen, where you have your dates. Anita, could you go back a slide? I think it is. I rushed through that real quickly. So it's very similar to how Anita was explaining your report to you about your dates, whatever your last closed fiscal year is, and whatever your current year reporting starts on in the beginning dates of the grant. And then in the date range section, you want your beginning date and your ending date of your grant to pick up all of your activity. Okay, all right, and then we'll go to the next slide. So on this slide, the content of the expanded general ledger format. So this is how I have mine set up. Again, just as Anita said, mine is called grant codes, and where hers is called fund codes, and you may have it named something totally different. And then you have your general ledger code in there, your PDC. Okay, so our PDC is where we locate our GRS codes. Again, you might call that segment something different. We include the session ID in there. Whenever Decio is reviewing, they want to see that session ID, and it helps you locate that invoice easier whenever they pull that for a selection. Then can you read that next one? I can't read that. Sorry, my bifocals just are not focusing here.
That's
read
your
this.
document number in your document.
Document number, that's what it says. Document number, yeah, I include the document number. Again, that's going to help you find that document whenever Decio does pull that invoice. And it's going to just make it much easier for you to locate it. And then after that, document date too. You want to include that. That way it can be selected within that range. What's the next one? Effective date. Oh, effective date. Most important date. They may not be having you pull the whole entire year. They may just be having you pull the month of April. So your effective date is what those pull dates are pull from. And then the name. That way you have the name of the document. And transaction description. I include my transaction description. You can or you can't. It just helps us locate our document a little easier. Of course, then your debit and credit. And then you may want to include your transaction source if that would help you locate it. If they're pulling a document, it would help you whether it was an API or it was a CR or JV or whatever might be. It might help you locate the document quicker and easier if they pull that for a selection. Okay, and then on the next slide, so then if you just view this to screen, this is sort of what that layout looks like. And this gets all of the information that DCEO is looking for whenever they're wanting to see your general ledger. You'll have very few questions if you can include everything on the front end whenever they're pulling this. The one thing I did want to say on the previous screen was the sort. So in grant code, I have that sorted by ascending because you're pulling maybe they're pulling multiple grants, or you have multiple LIHEAPs, or depending on what you're being monitored for, and you want to put those in ascending order there. And again, with your GRS codes as well, you want to put those in ascending order. That way it's pulling your 101, 102, 103 in that order that they want to see it. And then your GL codes as well within those. So that those sorts are important too. All right. Okay, except. Let's see. Was that all of mine, Anita? Are you next, or is this next page mine too?
I've got this one, Lynn.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. Okay.
Okay, so with the detailed general ledger report, you'll use this to provide the grant monitor to show all of the transactions within a specific date range, or possibly for the entire life of the grant period. They'll use this report to select test samples of the transactions. And in this section, we'll also review the use of report groups. Report groups are like my magic use here in MIP. I love using report groups. I use them all the time. If you're not using report groups, then please pay attention, because they are going to really help you when you need to cluster information and total things together that are not already set up to be clustered. This gets into the tips and tricks parts of the training that we're going to cover today. Using report groups will allow you to categorize your expenses and report them out by total. This is really useful in grant reporting in both the GL detail and the trial balance reports. And it allows you to categorize your information according to those GRS budget segments, and then total them by whether they're a program or an administrative expense. But it also really will help you when you're doing your own internal review of your information as well, so you can see where you are in those categories. So to start with, again, we're going to go to the reports tab, and again to the general ledger analysis, and then down to the expanded general ledger. And then again, using the report groups is going to help you cluster by categories. And in this particular example, we're going to use the GRS codes and budget codes, and we are going to create report groups that are going to total that by program support, direct client, or administration. So to get to the report groups, you're going to go to the reports tab. You go down and there is going to be an option called assign report groups. And when you go to assign report groups, this is the screen that's going to come up. You are going to utilize the your GL segments. And so you can see here, mine is fund, GL, the FAS 117, light items, activity, sub-activity. Yours are probably not called these. So you want to know what segment is it that you are looking for? Where is it that you have the GRS codes stored in your data entry? And that's the segment that you need to use here. In this example, I am going to use the segment that's called department. And once I select the segment, I'm going to set up the group set name. And in this case, I am going to call it the OCA expense category. You can name this whatever you want, whatever is helpful to you, but you need to remember what it is. You want to name it something that's going to mean something to you when you need to pull it on the group's screen when you're doing the report, the actual report. So you don't want to name it something just too nebulous like trial balance, or that's not going to give you a clue of a trial balance of what. So you want to name it something that's going to help trigger you to know what it is that you're using that set name for, or with that group set for. So my first group code is going to be 1-PGM. You're going to be limited in how many characters you can use in this code by however your MIP was set up. So I think I do have a limit of 6 characters in this code, so I have to be sometimes pretty creative with what I do. And I have found that if I use a number first by what segment I want to report first, it helps. If I'm going to have more than 10 segments, I want to have the one that I want at the beginning to be 01, and then I can go up to 99. So you want to keep in mind how you want this to end up reporting out, because it'll sort in order. So if I started it with just having program there, then if I had program, direct client, and administration, administration is going to come first because it's alphabetically ahead of the rest. So in this case, I want program to report first. I want the direct client benefit to be second, and I want the administrative cost to be the third category. And I'm going to call the group program support. It's going to give me a short title for it. In this case, there's enough characters that it printed the whole thing, but sometimes it will cut off to whatever number you have here. And then everything, like on all the other screens that you have in MIP, everything initially is going to be over here on the left-hand side. And you use your arrows to move it over to the right-hand side for what will be included in that report. So for the program support, I have everything included in the program support numbering of the GRS budget codes from 101 to 114. And then down below off of the screen, there will be a little button that says save. So you're going to save that segment and then move on and create your other segments as you need them. And if there's ever a need for DCO, say if they go beyond having those 3 defined segments that they have right now, where it's program, administrative, and direct client, if ever there's another that's added with another set of numbers, you can add those segments to this. So then you're going to go back to your report creation, and you're going to use the groups tab. And since I created it in the department group, I'm going to move that segment over to the right. And then on the drop down here, I am going to select, right here is the drop down. I'm going to select the one that I just created, the OCA expense category. So that is going to allow me now to utilize the 1-PGM code that we just created on the prior screen. So now I'm back to the content tab, and I am going to run this report by the department group code. So I'm going to put the group code at the top, and I want it to show the total, and I want to sort it in ascending order. And then in the report body part, I want to have the actual department code, the department title. I'm going to have the GL code, the GL title, the document number, the transaction description, the session ID. And as Lynn mentioned, having these document numbers and session IDs, if you ever have to research what was that document, if you don't have these included, it makes it much more difficult to get back to your to the source on the document. So you want to have your session ID and your document number, the transaction description to decide to, help you decipher what was that transaction for. Again, the effective date, debit and credit, and this time we are going to include the transaction source. The only things I'm going to sort on first, I'm going to sort on the department code, and I want to total that. I want to sort on the GL code in ascending order, and I want to total that. I do want to sort on effective date, but I am not totaling by effective date in this example. So here's what the report is going to look like when it comes through. This is actually the administrative expense. So because I had the in the previous screen, if you recall, we had the department group code and in the top. So it's going to show up in the header. So here are my administrative expenses. This is setting the page. And then within that, I have what is the department code. So the 301 for the personnel costs, the 302 are all being added according to what the GL code for those fringe benefits were. In this case, payroll taxes, state unemployment, health insurance, and goes on to whatever your codes may indicate. And then the other information is there. So we have our salaries and our document number. The description is the payroll date. The session ID is here, the effective date to show the 2 payrolls and the month. So this is how your report is going to pull. And in this way, you're able to easily see what have we spent in 301. You can see where you are budget wise compared to what you had submitted for a budget in 301 and where are you in reality for that, for whatever the date ranges that you have selected. But it also allows for the monitor to go through and whatever transactions they may want to select, then they can select those and easily see if it was something that was in the administrative expense, if it was a program expense, or if it was direct client. They're going to, it's going to be readily available and very clear what you are reporting. I can tell you from experience of being, frequently ICA, we serve as the grantee and have different agencies as subgrantees. And sometimes this information you get is totally jumbled up. It'll be sorted in such a way that you have to practically go through, and if it's sent to you in a PDF format instead of Excel, you have to go through and practically recreate this to reorder things in order to get the totals to match up for the budget. So if you make that easy, it just makes your monitoring go a lot smoother. It takes DCO a lot less time to have to go through and plow through your information, but it also makes it easier for you when you have to go through and see where are we in our spending and be monitoring it yourself. Another report that, well, let me ask first, are there any questions on using the report groups or creating reports in report groups? If you do have a question, please feel free to put that in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we'll call on you. Okay, since there's no questions there, we're going to move on to the check register. These reports are requested by monitors to ensure that consistent check numbers are used and that any missing checks can be appropriately accounted for. We have to, in good fiscal management, we have to be using pre-numbered checks. We have to have control of those checks. We have to make sure that checks are processed in sequential order, and that if there's any that have been voided in the system or otherwise destroyed, that we still have an accounting of those checks within our financial system. And so it's something that, as fiscal officers, we also want to be monitoring, because if we do have missing checks, this could be an indication or potential indication of a fraud issue taking place. So we want to make sure that we are being good stewards of all of our assets, and cash, of course, is one of our most important assets. So this is one of the controls that we should have in place to be sure that we are properly accounting for all of our sequential check listings. So to begin with, you would access the report tab, and then the very first one is going to be the check and voucher register. When you come in here, you can create multiple types of check register reports. But if you're doing one that's full open and it's going to pull everything that you have, you're just, mine is just called check register. And then you're going to give it the date range as it was requested by the grant monitor. Typically, they're going to ask for a 1 month date range. When you put on your page break code, you're going to do it by GL code. And in this case, because the check register is only looking at the cash side of a transaction, so it's not going to pull anything else. It's going to be the GL code that you have set up in your system for cash. And so you're going to start with that, and you want to select the show total. Then you're going to include the document number, the name, and that would be the vendor name when you're looking at checks, the effective date, the transaction amount, and the transaction description. In this case, we're showing the total on the GL code. So there's really no more to show. You're not going to total by each check number. That's already a given. And so the only thing we're going to order here is that we want it to be in ascending order by the document number. And then this is what your report is going to look like. It's going to have your GL code at the top and identify what that bank account is. And then it's going to start listing all of your checks in order, the vendor, the effective date of that check, the amount, and then what was that check written for? What did we have in as the description on that check? And so you, as I said, you do want to periodically be running these reports. I typically do it after every check processing, just to make sure that there was no errors done in the check numbering. Okay, Lynn, it's back to you to review the trial balance report.
All right, so this trial balance is again requested during the reconciliation process by your monitors whenever you're to review the closed grant cash and liability balances. And the request usually comes as summary trial balance reports as of today's date for the following closed grants. All right, so we're going to create a report group for that GL. So in order to do that, it's similar to how Anita, created the report groups that she just went through. In mine, I have the it's selected as of the segment which I call GL. Sorry, I'm trying to see this. And then again, just as Anita said, you just name it something that is unique so that you can identify it. Then in the group code itself, and then you just code them how you would need to see them. In my particular case, I used Roman numerals. That way it lays out in a format that follows how I would want my trial balance to be displayed. So you create that group, then move your GLs over into each of those line items. Like I said, just like Anita just created the other groups, it works exactly the same. The important part is that group structure. So whenever you run your report, it does follow a nice flow. All right. So then you're going to go and you're going to use that group in your report. So again, you're going to go to a report that you create. for your trial balance reports. You're gonna, again, those dates are going to be, you know, whatever that fiscal year is. And then whatever your, you know, again, your like your fiscal year that they're looking at, it's probably not the current one you're in because you're looking at something that's already closed. So those dates would be adjusted accordingly. And then your beginning date of the grant. And since they're looking at something that's probably already closed out and wanting to see your liabilities, you're probably not in your current year. You're going to go all the way back to the first date that grant began. For example, in LIHEAP, you know, you might be going back almost 2 years to get that beginning date. And then you're going to take it through the current date. Because the request says as of today's date, so you're going to take it through today's date, and they're wanting to see if there's any of your liabilities still sitting there. Okay. All right, and then on your content, in the top part, you're going to put your grant code up there, and you're going to show that by total. And then in your body, not a whole lot that you're going to put there. You're going to put that group. This is where you're going to pull in that group code information. So you want to pull a group GL group code in there. And then of course your debit and credit, and that's pretty well all you need there. Total by your account and GL codes there. All right, and then on. Oops. On the next screen, on your filter screen, you're going to go over there and you're going to select the group code that you're wanting to view this information on. Could be, like I said, it's something probably that's already closed out. Okay, so you just select that there. And then in the groups tab, you're going to want to select your GL group, and then you're going to want to select whatever you named that group that you just created. You're going to want to insert that there.
The same.
And then on your options tab, you'll select anything you want to see there, whether you know you have unposted transactions. Again, it's closed grants, so you probably don't have any unposted. So what I do is I look at it both ways. You want to look at it with unposted, you want to look at it with posted, because if there's unposted out there, you want to know why. Because ideally this would have already been a closed grant. There shouldn't be any unposted entries out there.
Training course, $30.
Okay, and then
for that.
So whenever you view it, you'll see you're only getting a couple of items here, because that should, if this is a closed grant, which that's what you're looking at here, you don't have any expenses and revenue because that's all closed out. You're only seeing what you have sitting there in your liabilities or your balance or whatever. You're seeing these all as a lump sum amount because you've already closed through that fiscal year. There. Okay. All right. And
okay,
that's all on that section. Then, does anyone have any questions on that? All right, and we'll go into the closeout trial balance. So whenever your grant comes to an end, OCA is going to request that you do your closeout report, and you have to have a trial balance that as part of that closeout report, and as part of that reconciliation process. All right, so again, we will go to reports. Oh, sorry, we'll go back to group code. So you've already created this group code with, as Anita showed you. So you would create the report group. Like I said, I call mine DCO. You might call yours something different. And you'll create it at that same segment used to represent DCEO at that 101 through 314, whatever that is. So Anita's kind of already covered that part of it, but this is just a little review there.
Yeah, and I have that.
All right, so then you would go to your reports and create a new report, name it, you know, something. I named mine closeout trial balance for DCEO. I want to identify it easily as a format that I've already created that is specific to DCEO's closeouts. All right. Again, you're putting your fiscal year information in here, your last fiscal year that's closed out, and then whatever, you know, your current reporting year is here. And then the whole entire range of the time period covered by this closeout trial balance. If it's a 7/1 to a 6/30 or however, you put that whole date range in there. Okay. And then on the content, again, at the page detail or the header part is by your grant code. I do not have the show total in this one, Mark, because you're totaling by each of those segments. And then down below in your details, I have the group code that identifies my GRS coding, which in my case is called a PDC group code that you just created, and you are totaling that. And then also, you'll notice you also have the detail of your PDC code in there, or whatever that GRS code is you're using. You want the detail in there. You don't just want it by a lump sum total. They want to see each one of those line items, not just the whole category, but both things. And then they also want to see within that GRS, they want to see what GL codes you have within that GRS 101, 102s, whatever codes. So you're adding that in there as well. And you're totaling just by, like I said, the PDC group code and the PDC codes, or your GRS codes. Okay. And then on our next tab, which is our group code. I'm sorry, I'm on my filter tab. On our filter tab, you have your grant code there that this report is on. And then your GLs. Now, they only need to see your expenses. They don't need to see your whole GL. So for this report, you're only showing what your expense codes are in your GL. So you're only wanting to see your expenses. My expenses run from 5,100 to 7,000. That's my range. So I'm putting that whole range in there that would pick up all of the expenses. And then on the group tab, we are putting that group that we created that identifies those GRS codes that we created in the beginning. Again, mine is called DCEO. So then if you preview this report, this is what it would look like. So you would see on this report how in my case, my 101 code also includes all of my wages and my fringe. It isn't broken out by 102, 101, and 102s here on this report, but then all of my other codes are. And then that's what that would look like there. So then, in order to get this into the appropriate 101, 102 lines, you have 3 different options you can do here. So you can take this and you can export this out to Excel. And whenever you get it into Excel, you can split those lines out. You would, some different things you do. So you kind of clean up that report and you kind of merge and center those titles, or I do, and then you kind of can go to your page layout and edit your header, to make it say exactly, your description you wanted to say. You can insert lines under your 101 and then move your GLs around and section those off by your 10 and add 102 in there. And then subtotal those, and then insert your titles and things like that. And you can manually manipulate that in order to get that into the format that OCA wants to see in your reconciliation. But if you do this, if you use this option and you export it out, you also have to include a copy of the trial balance that was printed out of your accounting system. But this is acceptable to Dekio to get this into the format that they want it to look like. And that
We
would be
should probably
option.
mention, Lynn, that this comes into play when you also use MIP for your payroll processing.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
because once you set a code, it's always going to follow that code through. You don't have that
Through payroll.
option.
Correct. Yes. Then option 2, you could set up a payroll distribution codes with identifying everything, your wages and your fringe, all of it as 102s or 302s. And I believe, Anita, this is the way you do yours.
Yes. So rather than having to go in and change all of the fringe numbers, which hits a lot more general ledger codes than salary and wages do, we could set everything to the fringe code. And then prior to posting, and it has to be prior to posting, you can go in to the transaction to payroll and edit the payroll system checks after you transfer it to accounting, and then go to the 7105 is our salary number, and just change that salary number to 0101. And then that way you don't have to change as many codes. And you can, when you actually open the screen, you can sort it by the GL code so that all of your 7105s would be together that may be affected by the GRS codes, and just pop right through them and change them all to 0101 or 0301, depending if they were administrative or program support. So it's saves you from having to drop it into a spreadsheet and redo the report. And then that way also your general ledger will match your other all of your other reports. You won't have to go back and change that ever again in the future. It'll be there for you. So it's just another way of managing your payroll transfer.
And we used to do it in our first option. That's the way we did it. But then after we had this webinar last year, and Anita had said that how she did it, we did change the way we do ours, and we changed our code to recognize everything as a 102. So we only have a smaller amount of items to change before we transfer over to accounting now. We do post in detail, whereas Anita posts in summary, but still we like it a lot better doing it that way. So based on our webinar last year, we improved our process. All right, and then option 3 is, after you're completely satisfied with your closing trial balance, then you could just make a lump sum journal entry from 101 to 102 for all of the fringe. And then you could print the trial balance out of MIP at that point, and submit it with your reconciliation closeout. And that would just entail one final entry after you're completely ready to submit. So those are kind of 3 options that you could do in order to get your trial balance to be in the format that OCA would like to see it at.
Okay, so this last report that we're going to cover with you, I'll get through it fairly quickly here, is to align with the drawdown spreadsheet that was developed by DCEO to assist you with, giving them the information they need for the backup for the drawdown, and also to have it align with what you already have in your trial balance. So following this, again, we're going to use report groups because they are so darn handy. We're going to do that to use this report. And this time, instead of using the expanded general ledger, we're going to go to the reports, general ledger analysis, and we're just going to look at a normal trial balance. I just created one for us, just called it a webinar report group trial balance. I'm going to enter the date range for capturing the drawdown period that I'm doing. You always want to, though, begin with the first day of your grant. So in this case, the date range is going to be the entire period of the grant. But if, say, you were doing this for August, you would have 7/1 through 8/31 of 2021. If you were doing it for September, you're going to start still with 7/1 and then go through September. So you want to catch it to the date range that you're doing. If you're doing it partway through a month, whatever that may be, if it's year to date, you're just going to, this ending balance, you can change according to whatever period of time you're trying to grab. But just always keep in mind to start with the beginning date of the grant. You're trying to capture your full grant period to date, a year to date total. In your setup, you're going to put your grant code at the top, and we want to show the total on that. In the body of it, we're going to go one above. If you're familiar with running the trial balance, you know that you can put available columns over here to the left. If you move those over, they're going to pop right in here. But then you can have subgroups under the account code, and account title will just follow that, and then your debit and credit. So above the account code, we want to have the column just be the department group code. And it's going to be those same ones that I had previously created. So we're not going to go back through that. But we want to total by that. And then we want to total by the department code. And as Lynn mentioned, using the GL code is also helpful to do, but it's actually not required for this report initially. So I'm going to show it to you. If we're going to, in this case, we're going to filter by the segment that represents the grant draw. So we're going to look at this and have the criteria 101. In the department group, again, it's the OCA expense category. And then we are going to select the show total. And this, I'm showing you in two different ways of doing it here at one time, sorry. This one, I left off the GL code just to show you, you can do the report in two different ways. And when the report prints out, if you don't have the GL codes, it's going to be straight by your department group code, and then the actual account code and the name of those account codes and the title, or the total, I'm sorry, the total amount. So we would have the 1 being the program expenses, 2 being the client benefits, and then 3 being the administrative expenses, and then the total of year-to-date expenses. If you include the GL code, then this is how it would look, which is what Lynn was showing you earlier. So I would have all of my program first broke out by the account code and the corresponding GL code. The end result is the totals will be the same. This just gives you a little bit more information. And the prior one was just in a little bit more of a summary form. to make it a little, less information to have to import. But it's a good idea to keep both of these. And if you run a detail report by using the same criteria and the same date range, you then have the detail information for each of these total costs altogether. So with that brings us to the end of our report. So we're open to questions. You can either raise your hand or put something in the chat. But if there's any questions on this, we're glad to take your questions, or if any of you have any things that you use to save time or to make your reporting a little easier, please feel free to share your ideas with the group. If not, then we are going to thank you for attending and hope that you found this information valuable. And I have both my email up and Lynn's email. If you have any particular questions that come up that you would like to ask us about with your reporting, then please feel free to reach out and let us know. Okay, questions going once, going twice. All right, thank you all for attending.